Now we're going to put the 66 back together. Um, you may have gotten a stock and a bag of parts, and if that occurred, all the parts, uh, it may be completely stripped, but there may be some parts that you have that you don't know where they go. I took the cross bolt, cross screw out, and that goes in this manner here through the right side of the stock. And to put those back in, there's two of them, front and back. To put that in, you simply put the screw in that hole. On the back side, there's a space for a nut, a little square nut that fits right in that. Use a small screwdriver and just put that into place. Another thing to be aware of is the rear cover screw buffer. Now this hole here is where the cover screw goes through, but if you get a stock or somebody has taken the rifle apart before, or you get a bag of parts with it, you make sure that this bushing rather, is in there. And that bushing is just a hollow piece. It's a support. It fits through this cross piece here, and just make sure that that goes in there and just pushes into place. And as I said, that's where your rear receiver cover screw goes in. To start to put this back together, it's best to put it back in order that you took it apart. What I like to do is I like to start with the bullet guide. In fact, that's pretty much where you want the feed ramp for the bullet goes in the back. And that goes right up in here. That's probably the most difficult part. It's not hard, but it's tricky to get that in. And this is your feed guide, your bullet guide. That goes in. To put it in, you have to put it in from the bottom. And to do that, this is where you'll need your pair of pliers. Now, you don't force it in there. It doesn't pound down in there. You simply want to use your pair of pliers to grab hold of it. Make sure this tab goes down below and it fits in that little slot. Hold it in place with your finger. Now, you have the front tab up underneath here, and you need to get this back part up into here. So one way to do that, I found the best way to do it, is use your tool, whether it's a small screwdriver, hold pressure on that, but you got to push that down lightly. At the same time, push the back end up and in, and there you go. It just sets into place like that. Don't pound it, force it, or do anything like that. It just simply sets into place. Now, of course, at this point, you want to make sure it's in there, so you invert your rifle stock back in, and it's up in there. That's when you get to your shell stop. Now that goes in this way, and it goes right into this actual shell stop. That's the part that holds the rim of the shell, goes in this slot here. So you want to put that in there, just place that down in there like that, and you see that it's off to one side. Now you have your spring, and the spring fits in a little slot like that, but the way I found the best way to do it is put your pin in through the right side of the hole and put it partially in take your spring, just set it down on top and push it forward underneath that pin, because that's what holds it, gives it pressure. And you see the little notch there, that little notch will catch. There it is, hooked, and then push your pin all the way through. And that locks that spring in place. You see the spring loaded now? That's your fastest, easy way to do it. That's this spring-loaded shell stop. Next thing we're going to do is put our disconnector back in. And the disconnector pivot assembly. This is the pivot. This is the actual disconnector. Now this is held in place with two small pins. And one way I found, and one of the problems that I typically see with rifles that I get, is this pinhole is right here, and people will put the pins inside this large hole, and then the disconnector won't work. It's kind of difficult to line this up, but this hole goes to this hole. So one way to do that is use your pin punch and line that up. It just sets down in there. It does take some line up to go. So once you got your pin disconnector in place in the right pin, then take one pin and place it in. It should just push right in, and then the other side is lined up, and just place your other pin in and push it in. Now we have our disconnector in, the disconnector pivot. The next thing we want to do is put our sear back in and our sear spring. Here's our spring, our sear with the cross pin that goes in this manner. And the spring goes in. You see there's a little small tab on the bottom. The spring actually goes in, line up with that tab. Now, the way to put this in, because it's under spring pressure, is to put the sear in first. Sear goes in below the disconnector, right here. There's a support for it right here. The way to put that in is put it in from the top this way, but flip the rifle over, take the pin, and push it up through there, and place that sear right on top of that pin so that you got it partially in. Then take the sear spring, take your sear spring, the sear spring goes in like this, so you actually gives you a little bit of a handle to hold it, and set that in from below right on that pin. You just set it in place, push the pin in, and push that all the way through. And what that does is get the sear lined up. Easy way to do it that way. Now you have the sear and your disconnector. You want to make sure the disconnector goes over this tab. This little tab here slips underneath the disconnector, and you want to make sure that that's under there and that's held in place when you attach the disconnector pivot spring and your trigger spring, because the next thing you want to do is put your trigger in. You have your trigger here, and again, I like to line up my pin first a little bit, put your trigger in, and then push your pin all the way through, and you have your trigger. Now, the problem you have is you have this small spring down in here and this spring here, and you need to hook this spring on this support using your pair of pliers, and that exposes the small spring that's down in there. It's hard to see. One way to do that, you can either do it with your pliers and grab hold of that little spring and try to get it up there, or you can use something like a bent paper clip. Put a little hook on one end, reach up in there, grab hold of the end of that spring and simply put it over your trigger. Now you have your trigger mechanism in place, your sear, and your disconnector. And you're in pretty good shape at that point.